There is fear in the crypto market. Why this is the case in the current assessment, why Bitcoin and altcoins in particular are falling sharply, all of that right now. Hi, I'm Marius from 10x Analytics. On my channel, it's about data, not hype, and why there's currently a lot of hype in the market. And how I assess this based on data, that's what we're getting to now. But first, grab yourself a nice relaxing coffee, and then we'll get started together right away. But first, the most important thing, you probably noticed that I renamed my channel. Rebranded, as they say these days, 10x Analytics. This was done intentionally. Many of you may have already read a post about it. And that's why I decided to change the name so that it fits my content much better. But let's dive straight into the full analysis now. For example, on X, I saw this week, I read again that the altcoin season is slowly starting. All the hype was pushed up again, and then came the massive crash. Why we crashed and why I actually almost predicted that we wouldn't go much higher from here. And what my 10x indicator also had to say about it, we'll get to that now. But first, let's go through everything based on data again. Bitcoin dominance is at 60.3. It has increased in the last 24 hours. That doesn't surprise me. Of course, altcoins were also sold off and exchanged for Bitcoin. Crypto market cap minus 2.61% in the last 24 hours. And stocks are a bit less volatile in that area. Altcoin season index 35. We're still in Bitcoin season, far from altcoin season in my view. Fiat greed is also looking quite interesting again. In the stock sector, we're still in the 63 range. With altcoins, we're still in the fear zone. What about the assets? Let's go through the most important ones. Oil is up. Logically, whenever tensions rise, the oil price also goes up. Vanadium has risen a bit. Gas is slightly down. Gold and silver have crashed massively, especially silver down 10%. By the way, I've already posted something about that on X today. Feel free to follow me on X. I always provide data-driven chart analysis there. And ultimately, I also write about how I see things from a data-driven perspective. So it's not just my opinion or the hype, but really how I assess the situation purely from a data standpoint. So feel free to follow me on X. There will now be regular updates. It's extremely exciting. Now let's move on to the macro data. The euro is a bit stronger than the US dollar. Dow Jones is down, S&P 500 is down, Nasdaq is also down, and so is the DAX. In fact, the DAX lost the most. That doesn't surprise me personally. Now to the top 5 stocks and cryptos. Nvidia down 6.8%. Massive. That's already a loss in my view. Apple, Microsoft, for example, as well, Google and Amazon. But as you can see, it's a mixed picture. With cryptos, things look rather bearish. Bitcoin lost almost 5%. Ethereum over 5%. XRP down and Solana also down. 6.5%. So overall, my crypto holdings performed worse than stocks. Bitcoin inflows when it comes to ETFs. ETFs are extremely important because it means that institutions which normally wouldn't buy Bitcoin themselves can buy ETFs instead, since it's easier from a regulatory standpoint. That means, of course, the more that is invested. Also from the corporate side, most of it then goes into Bitcoin ETFs, which is why this is very relevant. And that was positive over the past 7 days. Then the Federal Reserve, just to give a brief explanation again, that's the Central Bank of America. Simply put, when the effective interest rate is adjusted, whether it's raised or lowered, essentially more money is injected into the market. Injecting more money into the market means for risk assets. For example, of course, that's something positive and is bullish. Currently, the effective rate is at 3.63. The next meeting is on the 17th, so in exactly 1 month. And basically everyone, I would say, is predicting that it will stay the same as it is now. For crypto, that's rather bearish or neutral. Let's move on to stocks, specifically small caps in the stock sector, and see which ones are the winners there. We had quantum computing, which is extremely exciting. Quantum computers are always, in general, they're becoming more and more important and relevant. It's becoming a key narrative, and I will also be analyzing it soon in my 10x Elite. There are some penny stocks, some shares in that sector that I find interesting. In the altcoin sector, I'm especially surprised by Injective. I had it on my radar early on and also analyzed it on my 10x ranking list. Injective is generally an exciting project. Yes, that's the overview for now, as always. Now, of course, we'll move on to the chart analyses. As I said, I'm currently assessing the market purely from a data perspective to see where we actually stand. But before that, I'll show you something extremely important. I have the 10x Insider, which is my free group. You can also join for free. Link in the video description. There you get, on the one hand, 10 times intelligence. That's a crypto bot built on ChatGPT. For example, you can have stocks or crypto explained to you. Then I provide regular market updates, ultimately how the market has reacted, why, and also some additional information. Then I show data-driven assessments with my 10x indicator, and I also regularly present altcoins and stocks from my 10x Elite that I find interesting. Of course, the 10x Elite gets it first, and then the 10x Insider also get a look at it, so it's extremely exciting. Just join, it's free. All the info is in the video description. And now let's go straight to the chart. As always, we'll start with Bitcoin. Yes, we recently had a small red dot here, a small red dot. On my 10 times indicator, that means a possible bearish trend reversal. So I was already being cautious. There were already some people shouting on X and so on, saying that the altcoin season is coming back now. I'm always very skeptical about that, because if you look, we've just had a massive increase. That was from here. Over 27%. As I said, up here is always a bearish area, down here is a bullish area. And if you look at it, we were already in the bullish area here. We weren't entirely overbought yet at that point. You have to admit that. We still had a bit of room to move up. But basically we were in an area here where I personally would have already been extremely cautious. Then, after the little red dot appeared, possible bearish trend reversal, we dropped almost 5%. At the moment, you can see here, we're more or less in the middle of the range, which means there's still potential room to the downside. As I said, if we end up down here in these areas, then for me personally, that's always the point where I analyze more deeply and wait until the big green dot appears, because that means we are generally oversold. Exactly, that's my take on Bitcoin. As I said, at the moment, I'm passive. On the sidelines, I'm waiting until we reach the oversold zone. What about altcoins? Altcoin season, like I said, many people have said it's coming now. From my perspective, I'm rather skeptical about that. Since the top up here, we've basically been sold off more and more. If you think about it, that's 61%. We know in bear markets, with altcoins, it usually drops more like 80 or 90%. So I would be cautious here as well. Same story here. We had a small red dot here and then we got sold off. At the moment, that was here, minus 8%. Again, the same pattern as with Bitcoin. Usually it's Bitcoin that sets the direction, not altcoins. So, as I said, I would generally be cautious with altcoins as well. If we get down into these areas here, then it becomes very interesting for me again. In any case, let's go through some individual assets now. Let's get started. With Ethereum, it's basically the same picture. We already had big red dots here. This means we were in overbought zones here. From my perspective, it was already risky, and in the end, we've seen another sell-off here. Ethereum, same picture. The chart looks similar to Bitcoin, so there's really nothing new. Solana actually showed a pretty interesting reaction here, namely a small green dot, which could indicate a possible bullish trend reversal. After that formed, we actually went up by 16%, so that's actually quite substantial. But then a small red dot appeared here and boom, down over 7% again. Exactly, same thing here with me. Here, we're actually still well above the middle range because we've climbed significantly higher. That means the risk of us dropping even lower here is of course considerably higher. Same game here as well. Personally, I would wait until we move down into these lower areas and then it gets interesting for me. The 10x indicator. By the way, you can also use it yourself, especially if you want to see these areas here. And if you want to see the big green dot, then you can use the 10x indicator yourself. All the information is in the video description. Now let's move on to XRP. A lot of people are XRP fans, and I can understand that. XRP is definitely an exciting product. Of course, with XRP, it also has a lot of fans. But there are also these moon predictions being thrown around, like $1,000. I once made a video about how $1,000 would be mathematically possible. I'll link it for you up here. From my point of view, it's theoretically possible, but a lot would have to happen for that. And I laid all of this out in that video. Yes, with XRP, that's also how it looks at the moment. We're more in the middle range here. Again, we've only just recently actually formed a red dot. That was roughly here. So we've just gone down about 2.3%. There's a clear risk here as well. I would be careful at the moment. Kaspar, many people on my channel are fans of Kaspar, which I can honestly understand. Personally, I'm a fan too. Purely from a data-driven perspective, in terms of fundamentals, Kaspar is very, very strong. In my view, as I said, Kaspar has one of the best technologies as a mix of proof of work and proof of stake. So from a technical standpoint, I'm really impressed by it. So from a chart analysis perspective, what does it look like? We had a small green dot here. After that, we also went up by almost 27%. But then a large red dot formed here. You could already see it here. I would have been extremely cautious at that point. With the 10x indicator, which I actually use daily in my chart analyses, I can see things like this in advance, switch off my emotions, and that way I'm also a bit mentally protected. Minus 14%. From my perspective though, the correction isn't over yet. We can see here. There's still plenty of room to the downside within this range. You could say now, although as I mentioned, I'm not really a fan of direct chart analyses since they usually don't say that much, but if you were to say that maybe here's a point where we could eventually see a bounce, that would roughly fit in here as well. Personally though, I'm still being cautious at the moment. So when would I personally get into Casper? First of all, I would look at it from a long-term perspective. And secondly, I would wait here until we come down to this area and a big green dot forms somewhere around here. And then I would analyze Casper further and potentially look for an entry point. Internet Computer is extremely popular, especially on my English channel. Why? Well, because it's also extremely strong technically, especially in the Web3 sector, and it wants to rethink the internet. If you don't know Internet Computer yet, I definitely recommend you check out my analysis on it. I'll link it up here. From my point of view, Internet Computer is also one of the most exciting projects out there. By the way, on my 10 times ranking list, it performed extremely well, just like Casper. And as I said, I take a data-driven approach. I'm not interested in any hype. And from a data-driven perspective, Internet Computer is a strong project. Here it looks similar. Interestingly, just like with Casper, we also saw an increase. A small green dot had formed here. After that, we went up almost 40%. Just imagine what kind of increase that is. But then a small red dot appeared. Risk. And then we were sold off again by about 20%. Here too, we've already almost reached the overbought zone. There's still plenty of room to the downside here. Same game. I'm being cautious at the moment and would wait. Litecoin, yes, also interesting. With Litecoin, we actually formed a big red dot here. Massive risk, I have to say. I would also be very cautious at the moment if we just take a look at this. At the moment, it's just about 5 to 6%. But the downside potential is significantly higher. The potential range is again all the way down here. So there's still room to the downside, so to speak. Then let's take a look at Supra next. Really interesting. Supra is actually very low cap. Of course, from a market cap perspective, they have high volatility. You always have to be careful with that. But in general, it's interesting that there was another increase here. Let's take a look at it. The small green dot on the indicator. Boom, 77%. Just imagine that. That's how it is with low caps. They can jump 100, 200% just like that, but they can also fall just as quickly. Exactly at the moment here. Interestingly, no dot has formed here yet. For now, there's no bearish trend reversal. Still, I would be cautious from my perspective. If Bitcoin doesn't perform, then Supra won't perform either. It won't be able to completely detach itself from that. At the moment, we're back in our hype phase here. The product, the altcoin, is rising. A lot of people, I'd say, have FOMO. Of course, they don't want to miss out, so they jump in at the top somehow, and then it goes down. So I'd be cautious here as well. I'm also waiting here for a big green dot again until we're back in the oversold zone. VeChain also an extremely exciting project, purely from a fundamental perspective. From a chart perspective, it doesn't look so good. Here as well. Small red dot, and of course we went down after that. Accordingly, let's take a look at it, roughly here, minus 11%. I'd be cautious at the moment also in the middle range. Then, Hondo, also extremely exciting. Hondo, RWA, real world assets, an extremely important narrative, so it's also an interesting product. And BlackRock might even be building on Hondo, by the way. I've actually done an analysis on that, which I'll link for you up here. Then let's take a look at it. What's interesting is that the indicator already formed a small green dot here, which means a potential trend reversal. After that, it went up by about, 76%. But then a big red dot, possible top formation. It went down by 16%. There's still a lot of room to the downside. I would be extremely cautious at the moment. All right, let's do a quick summary again. Recently, we've seen a massive increase. From my point of view, we're now slowly reaching the top. At the local top, and I think there's still quite a bit of downside ahead. Of course, that's partly due to the chart technicals, but it's also related to the fact that we passed the Clarity Act, which was initially a positive sign. There are still a few things that need to happen before it's final. But actually, it was an extremely positive sign for the crypto market. However, since we're currently in a bear market, and especially retail, meaning regular buyers, not institutions, they're simply staying away from the entire crypto market. They're all investing in stocks, for example in AI stocks. Even small projects are rising massively there. That means the crypto market is currently out. In my view, that will change again in the future. But at the moment, from my perspective, hardly anyone is buying. Sure, companies are buying more and more and regulations are being further developed. So we have a positive basic framework. But in the current situation, really only those who are already in the crypto market remain. They're just shifting their assets. But there are very few new ones coming into the market. So as I said, I would be cautious at the moment. I actually think we'll remain bearish for the next 6 to 12 months. As I said, in general, I'm now waiting until we see a big green dot again on the one-day chart for Bitcoin. And for me, that's a kind of signal. Now we could slowly see a bottom forming, but it could also go even lower. But it's a kind of indication. From today's perspective, as I said, I would be very cautious. If you want to see more updates like this in the future, and if you also want to see how the 10 times indicator develops going forward, how the overall situation evolves, and how I assess it based on data and without hype, then follow me on my channel. As I said, I do news updates, but I also do complete analyses with 20 key figures for altcoins and stocks, which are really evaluated based on data. Feel free to follow me here on my channel or on X then. And if you want to dive deeper, then join the 10x Insiders. You can find all the information in the video description.